How soon before the lights are completely off? Too ghastly to contemplate, you say? Well, how many times have we thought about any number of scenarios and then they happened? The president has been convening crisis meetings since cutting short his recent overseas trip following the funeral of Queen Elizabeth. Today, he's going to be meeting his entire cabinet as government struggles to rein in the worst round of blackouts the country has experienced since load shedding began 15 years ago. Joining me to discuss this is Professor Mark Swilling, a commissioner of the National Planning Commission, but also co-director of the Centre for Sustainability Transitions at Stellenbosch University and the chair of the Development Bank of Southern Africa. If anybody knows his stuff about this, he certainly does. Prof, thank you very much for your time this morning. We're talking to you, of course, you are in DC at the moment, so I really appreciate you staying up for us, your time over there. So let's get straight into it. It's been 15 years of load shedding. This is the worst year on record, and we're still in September. What can the president do or say that could make any difference now?
Well, good morning to you and your listeners. Well, I don't think there's anything that the president can do to stop load shedding immediately. I think we need to face facts, which is that we're going to have load shedding for at least the next 2 years. What we can hope for is it doesn't get as bad as stage 4, 5, or 6. That's what we can hope for. What the president can do is to make sure that renewable energy generation plants start getting built as quickly as possible. And that will mean, for example, unblocking what is called bid window 5, which are the projects that have already been approved but cannot reach financial close because the prices of the equipment has gone up drastically. And many of the companies are finding it difficult to figure out how to implement these projects.
There are all sorts of reasons for that, of course, including the insistence of, local acquisition as far as that is concerned. But we'll come to that in a moment, because if those decisions are not made, my question then to you is, are we staring down the barrel of the gun?
Well, we're already staring down a barrel of the gun. Our economy, every time we hit stage 4, we're losing 2 billion rand a day. So we are in a very, very serious crisis. If what you mean is whether we face a collapse of the grid, I think that is quite a long way away. The reason we have load shedding is to prevent us from having a total blackout, as different power stations trip and have to be switched off and restarted after some repairs.
You're right. I mean, obviously, load shedding is, as Eskom has said, a preventative measure to reduce demand and pressure on the grid. Eskom has said a total collapse of the grid is unforeseen as an event. But they're also saying if it did occur, there'd be no advance warning. We wouldn't see it coming.
Well, that is the biggest problem that we currently face, which is uncertainty. So Eskom has got a planned maintenance program where they, in advance, plan to take certain power stations or sections of power stations off the grid in order to repair and rehabilitate them. But because many of the machines are so overused and some of them are just too old and should be shut down, Eskom has made it clear they can't predict what's going to happen tomorrow. So any one of those machines can trip over. Even the new ones, Madupi and Kusile, have proven to be not as reliable as they should be. So what Eskom faces, and therefore what the nation faces, is high levels of uncertainty. We just don't know. And that's a very hard thing to accept. South Africans want the lights to stay on, while on the other hand, we have a very unreliable system that can trip at any time.
has there been a consideration about what would happen if a national blackout were to occur?
Yeah, I mean, there has been quite a lot of debate and discussion about that. And Eskom, the system operator within Eskom, has got, kind of emergency plans to deal with that eventuality. The problem is that it would take at least 5 days to get the grid back up and running. So there would effectively be at least 5-day blackout. In other words, there would be no electricity for anything. Power station, petrol stations wouldn't be able to operate, ATMs, traffic lights, cell phone towers, sewage plants wouldn't be able to pump the sewage. There'd be water cutoffs, so it would be a pretty bad situation. But I think it would be reckless to start predicting that we are close to that.
Is it your sense, though, given the scenario you've just outlined of what that would look like, is it your sense that there's been an appreciation of the enormity of the problem? How is it that the entire Eskom board, although full of competent and qualified people in their respective fields, has no engineering or electricity experience or qualifications?
Well, I mean, that may well be true, but it's a board that is very committed, meets almost daily, and it's not really the fault of the board that it lacks those skills. The Minister of Public Enterprises is responsible for appointing people to the board, and so we need to look to him and say, do you think the Eskom board has got the appropriate set of skills? But I think what we need to recognize is that Eskom is actually doing an extremely good job under very, very, very unfavorable circumstances. So De Ruyter came in the beginning of 2020 and he inherited a situation which he now admits is much, much worse than he thought when he was appointed. And I think the best that we can hope for is that that the energy availability factor does not decline any further, that we remain at we remain at a level where we don't go into stage 4 and above. That's what we can hope for, but we can't hope for an end to load shedding until Eskom has got the space to take machines off for extended periods of time in order to fully prepare them. They can't do that until there's new generation capacity to take up the slack, and that still has to get built. And the quickest way to build that is with renewables, because it could take 2 years to do a renewable energy plant, it could take 10 years to do a coal plant.
From a cabinet point of view or a political point of view, what does the president do? Because fingers have pointed towards Gwede Mantashe, for example, as far as regulatory red tape preventing private generators from providing power. Ibrahim Patel has been blamed for his localization insistence. Pravin Gordhan, whom you've mentioned, has been blamed for any number of things, including the leadership that has been placed at Eskom. What does the president do to demonstrate political muscle and a willingness to tackle this problem head on, given that those criticisms of his members of his cabinet?
Well, I think we need to acknowledge that the president did make a very decisive statement back in July. So after quite extensive consultations, he put forward a plan which was credible and underpinned by a new organization for implementation, the Electricity Crisis Committee, and Operation Vulindlela, which does the day-to-day operational management and implementation. So I think we have a governance structure in place as well as a program. The president even promised back in July that instead of declaring a state of emergency, they're going to pass legislation that would make it possible to overcome some of the red tape. But I think we need to acknowledge that the minister responsible for energy policy, Gwede Mantashe, has acted. He has increased the amount of energy that needs to be now procured in bid window 6. He has lifted the cap on embedded generation, which means anybody who wants to build a renewable energy plant can do so without limitations, as long as you can connect to the grid. So I think quite a lot has started to happen. But what we need to accept is that no matter what is done now, it's not going to end load shedding now. What we need is actions that are directed at putting as much renewable energy generation capacity onto the grid as quickly as possible. If that starts to happen, then we can say the soonest load shedding could end is 2 years' time.
So take the bitter pill, swallow the bitter medicine. There is a plan, but we may not feel the effects immediately. For now, we've got to live with the decisions that were not taken some years ago.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, in 2015, the CEOs, the then CEOs of Eskom, Molefe and Matsela Koko, sorry, they refused to sign the power purchase agreements that would have resulted in the construction of 5 gigawatts of renewable energy generation. If they had signed those in 2015, 95% of the load shedding that we have today would not exist. And so, those decisions that they made are costing, every time we hit stage 4, South Africa 2 billion rand a day, and they are the lives of poor people who are being immiserated as a result of those decisions. They both don't appear in very good light in the Zondo Commission report, so they need to be held accountable for the mess that we are in.
What do you say to those people? I was going to say, what do you say to those people who say, well, hang on, when they were in charge, they were able to stop this for a while?
Yeah, they stopped this for a while by abusing the machines. They just issued instructions. They kind of basically held a gun to the heads of the managers and said, keep those machines going at all costs so that we look good. What that did is wreck many of those machines. And that's the problem that we are now inheriting. There isn't the space to now fully repair and rehabilitate those machines, and some of them should be just closed down because they can't be rehabilitated because they're just too old. And also those two presided over the looting of Eskom. So Tutuka, which is a relatively young power station, has got an energy availability factor of 30%, and it should be 85%. And it's well known as the most corrupt power station in the fleet. So there's a legacy of state capture, which those CEOs presided over, and it's been well documented now in the Zondo Commission. So what you are referring to as good performance was an illusion.
Professor Mark Swilling, appreciate your time. Commissioner of the National Planning Commission, also at Stellenbosch University, and the chair of the Development Bank of Southern Africa.
Current events, developing stories,
tough questions,
your voice making a difference.
This is Breakfast with Bongani Bingwa.